Hello, I'm Maureen, the Mimi half of DotAndMimi, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about my practice. This is the studio, i.e. a room in the house that I've commandeered, in which I do a lot of my work. I also have another room that I've commandeered in which I have my 51-year-old Bernina sewing machine, and that is the object which manufactures a great deal of my textile work, all of my textile work, in fact. My work is there's some wine there. My work is totally inspired by my grandmother, Dot Murphy, who was a consummate artist of her type in her time. She was a needle woman of extraordinary talent, and I've used her tatting as my logo on my business cards and my little shop sign. She was also an amazing china painter, as they called them in her day, and this is an example of her work. When I was a little girl, this was my favourite piece of hers, and so after she died, it was a great thrill for me to inherit this piece. She has not signed she signed it, but not dated it. But I would say it is one of her earlier pieces, probably from the 1930s or 40s. This is a piece from much, much later in the 1950s, when she was being a little bit more influenced by more modern tendencies and was also having trouble with her vision. She, as I said, was a great needlewoman, loved fabrics, as did my mother, and I inherited that love. And so a lot of my work in my DotAndMimi brand is to do with textiles. I'd like to show you some of those pieces. I'll start with this one here. This is one of my wristlets. You can see that it's not terribly big. It's a little clutch with a detachable wrist strap. And as with most of my work, it is made from offcuts, repurposed fabrics, vintage fabrics, which I'll show you some more of shortly, and lots and lots of bits and pieces that I've just accumulated over the years. I call this range the Barbara range because the main fabric, the feature fabric in this, was given to me by my great friend Barbara. And it is, or was, because it's being repurposed, a magnificent woolen shawl, quite large, and it's covered with this gorgeous print, Piranesi style almost print. I have taken pieces of this fabric and used them in a number of items. This is the only one that's left, but obviously there's a great deal of the shawl left, and so it will be able to be used for more and more pieces in the future. In addition to the shawl, there are remnants and offcuts of silk dupion, black linen, some rayon damask, some beautiful silver silk organza, some vintage yellow linen, which is over 30 years old. And on the back, or the front, whichever way it is, there is a beautiful offcut from, or not an offcut, it's actually a roll end, part of a roll end from the Australian designer Tony Matuszewski. It's the most gorgeous re-embroidered silk organza. And I've used it in a number of pieces, and it just goes incredibly well with so many things. As you can see here, it appears in this really, really beautiful, in combination with this really, really beautiful, very, very old 1960s piece of vintage cotton, a sample from the Metler company. This is, it's part of their series on French artists, and they're all the most amazing art informel or abstract expressionist type works. I can't find out anything about Lila Sani. Unfortunately, she doesn't appear in Google searches, but the fabric that I have been able to use in a few items is just absolutely beautiful. And of course, there's the Tony Matuszewski, and then various offcuts of silk, dupion, some silk piping that I've made myself, and my signature trim made from silk offcuts. Part of my ethos is to be as low waste as possible and to be sustainable. Hence, most of my work uses recycled, repurposed, offcuts, vintage, and so on fabrics. Hence, the design of the items is often dictated by the amount of the fabric that I actually have at my disposal. And I'm often having to trim off little thin strips just to make things straight. And so those little strips get turned into my signature trims. While we're on the subject of the vintage fabrics, let's have a look at one of the silks. This is silk from the Rudolf Brackbar company from Switzerland. It dates, this one, I would say, from the 1970s. It's actually a sample. What I've done is, well, it's two samples. What I've done is made a series of scarves from these samples. In some instances, I've used quite contrasting fabrics, but complementary at the same time, to create the scarf. The size of the scarf, the shape of the scarf is dictated by the size of the samples that I have. Here is another sample from Rudolf Brackbar. This is an amazing silk. It's a silk twill, and it has a handle on it like nothing you've ever felt before. It is absolutely amazing. Just so astonishing. Here's another piece. And this piece, these two pieces, I'm thinking of combining together to make a scarf. I'll continue with these. The tiny little samples, the tiny little colour swatches get turned into things like lavender sachets, and in this case, a hair scrunchie. These little baby samples are literally very, very small pieces, roughly about 30 centimeters long and just about 10 to 12 centimeters wide. And again, here you can see the most astonishing 1970s palette. Look at that. Just amazing. Here are some cottons from Austria in the most beautiful folk patterns. I'd say these might even date back to the 1950s, but I can't be really sure. Here's another cotton from the Série d'Artistes. This is the most amazing Beautiful cotton. Unfortunately, I haven't got enough of the selvage to tell me exactly who the artist is in this case. A great deal of my work thus comprises these vintage fabrics, but not only those fabrics. In addition to the textile work, I've been collaborating with a jeweller, my friend Belinda Shaw, and we've been making a range of all kinds of jewellery. I'm only going to talk about the polymer clay jewellery at the moment. These pieces are based on my drawings. They are what Belinda has done is made transfers from my drawings and transferred them onto polymer clay, and then they have been turned into a range, in this case, of earrings. We paid just as much attention to the backs as to the fronts, and so you will find that the backs of the earrings are just as important and as striking, often contrasting but also complementing the designs. This is a really interesting pair of asymmetrical stud drops, and this pair is not asymmetrical but has the most amazing cane work back. Not cane work, but that'll do. So lots of beautiful designs in these earrings that we've been working on. They are taken from my original works. Just details of my original works have been transformed into these delightful earrings. Here's a whole lot of them which haven't made it to the Etsy shop yet. I think that might be enough to talk to you about tonight. I'd love for you to visit my shop during the Etsy market and have a look at what's there and make some purchases. Thank you. Good night.